You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. So it's a nice bright morning this morning as I record this, and so I've been out for a walk. And one of the things I notice when I go for my walks is that all of my steps are the same. I put my left foot in front of my right and then my right in front of my left. And each time I take a step, I move forward the exact same pace, the exact same distance each and every time. One step forward, next step forward, and so it goes on. I never ever take a step and then it catapults me 3 miles into the forward distance. Never happens. And yet, in life, that happens a lot. Even though it might seem that something is quite far away, some of the steps we take actually have a really big impact. And in fact, this is a thing. It's known as the Pareto principle after the economist who discovered it. That sense that some of the things we do actually have a much bigger impact in the outcome than the size of the step itself. And so in life, we do take a small step and it catapults us miles and miles ahead. And this happens an awful lot. And so in this episode, what I want to show you is how to do simply one thing. And so I'm going to show you 3 of these one things that you can simply take. And they're small things that can really catapult you forward so that change can happen really much more quickly than you thought possible. What we're going to look at in this episode is 3 things that you can do to find the change that makes the change. And by that I mean the change that you make that really has a big difference for you. So the 3 things I'm going to focus on in this episode is firstly, one big impact. Secondly, one small thing. And thirdly, one key trigger. So let's take the first one. One big impact. Now, like I say, there's lots of different ways that we can change, and it can get overwhelming sometimes to think of all the things that we'd like to be different. And yet, of all the things that could change, like I say, some changes will have a bigger impact than others. And so the first step is to identify of all the changes that could happen, that you could invest your energy in, what's the one change that you could make that would actually have the biggest impact? So, I don't know, if you were to suddenly get a magic wand, or you were to get one wish, and you had to make one change in your life that was going to give the biggest payoff, what would that actually be? And what that does is it gives you a real focus, and it just kind of puts everything else on the back burner so that you can focus on the thing that's going to have the most impact for you. Now, it could be exercise, it could be changing how you eat, it could be changing something in your relationships, it could be, it could be sleep so that you get more energy. But it's that one thing that could happen now. So I'm not talking about, say, winning the lottery or anything, but one thing that could happen now, that could be a change in your life that could happen now that would make the very biggest impact for you. So that's the first one. Choosing that one thing that could happen now that would make the biggest impact. Because it makes sense, doesn't it, to start there. Why start on the thing that you could put your energy in and the change happens, but nothing much happens as a result of it. So this would be the change that would really have the biggest impact that could happen now. So that's step 1. Step 2 is one small thing. So what is the one small thing that you could do that would make that change more likely? So I don't know, at the moment, for instance, we're in lockdown, aren't we, as I record this? And I know that last time we were in lockdown, I ate more than I normally would eat. And so the big change might be for me that I don't put weight on like I did first time round. So this is just a personal thing. And the one small thing that I could do maybe is no longer buy chocolate from the shop. Now that thing would make it much more likely that I wouldn't be eating more than I wanted to because I wouldn't have it in my cupboard nearby. So that's just an example, but it'll be different for you. So once you've identified the one change that would have the biggest impact, what is the one small thing that you could do? So for instance, I don't know, if you were trying to get sleep, if you were feeling in the grip of insomnia, that might be the change that is the biggest one for you. And the one small thing that would make that more likely might be, I don't know, get a book instead of looking at your phone, or put some lavender out because that's a smell that promotes sleep, or have some sort of cut-off time for screen, or whatever it happens to be. Just identify one, not a collection, but one small thing that you could change that makes that other change much more likely to happen, the one that would get you the big impact. Now, I remember when I was a jogger, and the one small thing that I could do to ensure that I actually had my jog that day was I would leave my running clothes out the night before. So in the morning, I would wake up, I'd see them there, they were already laid out, and I'd just put them on and I'd go. So that was something that would have a big impact for me, exercising better, getting fitter, getting healthier. And the one small thing I could do in order to knock that domino, if you like, was just to have my clothes out the evening before. So once you've identified your one big impact, and you've also identified your one small thing that you could tweak that makes that other change more likely, the final step is to find one key trigger. Now, when I talk about one key trigger, I'm really talking about some sort of thing that prompts you to do it. Now, there are a number of things that you could choose as a key trigger. You could set an alarm on your phone. For instance, I use a software on my phone which is called Life Reminders. And then some of the things that I would probably otherwise forget, I stick it in my phone and it reminds me at a certain time. So that might be a trigger. It might simply be a trigger that you leave something out. So for example, if I have to take something somewhere and I want to make sure that I don't walk out the house and forget it, I always put it in front of the door. Simply because I have to move it then to open the door, and in the act of moving it, it acts as a trigger and I think, oh yeah, I need to take that. So what's the one key trigger that would prompt you to do the one small thing that would make it more likely that you would make that one single change that would give you the biggest impact? Now, in terms of the example that I was given before, my one key trigger was actually putting the clothes out. So I woke first morning and right in front of me were my running clothes, my trainers and everything. And so it was the first thing I saw. It wasn't like I laid them out and then kind of put them in the wardrobe. I had them out. They weren't just ready, they were right in my face. So I could have this key trigger. And so they're the three things that you need to do then in order to make it more likely. And they're only small things, each of them, aren't they? One is to identify the big impact. Next is the small thing that would make it more likely that you'd get that one change. And thirdly is, what is the one key trigger that would remind you to do the small change? Now, on that final one, the key trigger, there are actually key triggers that happen right throughout the day. So if you think of your day, there are many, many different things. Behavioural scientists call it anchors, in fact, where you're definitely going to do them. And so they could be a trigger. So for instance, I don't know, every single day you wake up. Every single day you might have breakfast. Every single day you'll brush your teeth. Every single day you'll have dinner. You'll have your evening meal. So throughout the day, there are things that happen reliably in your life, and they can act as that key trigger. You can actually tie this one small thing that makes the big change likely. You could tie that actually to one of those things that happen every day. So there's a guy called BJ Fogg, and he's a behavioural scientist, one of the leading behavioural scientists in the world. So he does wonderful things and studies around behaviour design, which I suppose is what we're talking about here. And he noticed that one of his anchors is he goes to the toilet every day, several times a day, in fact. And every time he goes to the toilet to relieve himself, he'll do 2 push-ups. That's all. And so he's using that trigger to kind of ensure that he gets 2 more push-ups than he would have otherwise got. And so these triggers can be something that you set out deliberately, like leaving something by the door or setting an alarm on your phone, but it might just be that you tie this particular small thing that you're going to do to one of these trigger points that naturally occur in the day. Okay, so let's have a recap. I was talking at the start about how my walks are always one step brings one step, but in life it's not really like that. That there are certain things that, although a tiny step in the doing, will have a massive outcome that's really disproportionate to the small step that you took. And so we looked at how we could bring about big change very, very simply and start pretty much right away. And the 3 steps that we looked at were, firstly, identify one thing that could happen now that would bring you the biggest impact. So there might be lots of changes that you have to make, but this is the one thing, so you can focus on one thing. And that change, should it occur, that could happen now, would have a really big impact for you. The second step was to identify one small thing that you could do that would make that other change more likely. So you remember my one was, I won't buy chocolate anymore because I don't want it in the house. And that would be the one small thing that makes the bigger change, eating better, much more likely. And the final step was one key trigger. And we saw how, for example, when I put my running clothes out, so it was the first thing I saw in the morning, I made sure it was in front of my face so it would prompt me. And so you can do things like that. You can leave things about that are going to remind you. You can even tie things to particular points in the day which reliably keep on happening, like brushing your teeth, going to bed, waking up in the morning. All of these things could become key triggers that just prompt you to do the one small thing that will make it more likely to get the one change that would have the biggest impact for you. If you found this episode useful, please do share it so other people can get the benefits as well. If you'd like to work with me directly, I'm Alun Parry, and you can find more about me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And of course, you don't have to be local to me because I work online, so you can be based absolutely anywhere. And of course, please subscribe to the podcast as well, because it's absolutely free and it means that you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on the next one.